looking forward to, as I said at the start, really looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts and learnings from product leadership over many years, and seeing if I can help all of you, become better leaders, and obviously answer any questions or any other topics that come up during this meeting today, or this discussion today. So diving straight in, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the disruption that is happening around us. When we look around us, we realize that digital technology is changing our lives is faster than ever before. Our devices are getting smarter and more indispensable. If you think about it, we start most of our days with our devices telling us good morning. They remind us to get up and exercise. They answer our questions, and they even take our orders. I'm not sure how many of you saw the demonstration that Google did around a year or so back during one of their conferences, where they showed an Android device having a live conversation with someone at a restaurant, making a dinner reservation for that person, for the owner of that device, on behalf of that owner of the device, without the person being involved in that conversation at all. So it's clear that our devices that all of us work with and use on a daily basis are becoming increasingly smarter and powerful. And for those of us in the technology industry, this is a truly exciting time and a truly exciting phase. And it's one that all of us should be really excited about. Actually, not just those who are in the technology space, for everyone, because at the end of the day, we are all benefiting from the dramatic shift and the dramatic changes happening on the digital space. But it also is putting enormous pressure on businesses to reach the right people with the right content at the right time, faster than ever before. All of us, and people in general, are consuming more content on more devices, far more than ever before, which is leading to an explosion of data. Robotics and automation, as we know it, is in more ways than one transforming how work gets done, and is really requiring us to think about work in new and unimaginable ways. So while businesses figure out their digital strategies to deal with some of these changes, new modalities and experiences are coming into play that require them to then rethink their strategies. Entire industries run the risk of being completely wiped out by a well-designed app. And there are a bunch of examples of that, but the two that really stand out are Uber and Airbnb. And one could argue that Amazon.com or Amazon has also pretty much derailed or changed how we do any retail business by virtue of having a well-designed experience. Most businesses are trying to think about how they can outmaneuver their competition by fighting for mind share and attention. Now, when we think about new modalities, the touch interface has been around for a while and I would say has matured quite well, though there's probably more room for improvement there. Voice is something that is fairly new, has come up fairly recently, and is beginning to mature as more and more devices support the voice input. And as we bring more and more voice assistants into our homes, and as we interact more and more with our mobile devices and our automobiles using voice, we will, over time, start expecting to be able to interact with voice with almost every digital experience. In the midst of all this, new technologies are changing how we create and consume content. AR as an experience has been around for a long, long time. It came with a lot of promise. Everyone thought that AR would completely change how we do things. And it hasn't really panned out quite yet. But as we see AR being more integrated or better integrated with the platforms and with the devices themselves, my sense is that AR is going to change how we consume and create content over time, especially in the context of social media, in the context of gaming, and maybe even more broadly in the context of just all kinds of entertainment. So while businesses are finding ways to navigate all this change happening around them, they're also recognizing that the customer expectations are changing quite dramatically. Customers are expecting personalized experiences based on who they are, their needs, regardless of when, where, or how they engage and consume content. Sorry, they engage with content or with experiences. So all of this underscores that experiences matter more than ever before. The question then is, how does one win in this environment? And the answer, for the most part, is that it starts with design, innovation, and standout experiences. But when we think about design and innovation, we often run into this classic dilemma between desirability, feasibility, and viability. Now, what do these mean? Desirability, for the most part, refers to how one would essentially ensure that the product or the innovation that you're working on addresses the needs of a customer. It's all about ensuring that the customer is clearly defined, the problem of that customer, the problem that you're trying to solve for that customer is clearly defined, and that you build an experience that resonates with that customer. Feasibility is all about ensuring that you know how to build a solution that meets the needs that were defined in the desirability phase. And viability is all about ensuring that what you build is viable. There's a real business case or a business model that supports this product that you're building. And the sweet spot of innovation is when you can balance all three components equally. Now, in certain situations, you could say that desirability has a bigger role to play. In certain situations, feasibility may have a bigger role to play. And in certain situations, the business model and the viability may have a bigger role to play. But at the end of the day, the real sweet spot is when you can strike the right balance between desirability, feasibility, and viability. What we find is that when it comes to design and innovation, some companies do it extremely well. They have a track record of doing it extremely well. And there are other companies that don't do it all that well. They struggle with it. They have some successes, but I wouldn't say that they're extremely successful. So let's start with the ones that do it well. So if you look at some of the modern giants, let's say Apple, Uber, Amazon, I've just talked about them, Google with their search solution, and Airbnb. What really differentiates all of them is that they have heavily invested in experiences. And from their perspective, experiences, they are focused on making experiences matter. They obviously do a good job with the feasibility and the viability front. I mean, yes, some of these businesses are extremely successful. One could argue that Uber and Airbnb are still struggling to be successful from a business point of view. But at the end of the day, they're generating a ton of revenue, and they're looking for ways to pivot their business, even as we speak, given some of the challenges from COVID-19. But the unifying theme across all these companies and the solution from Google is that they embrace the fact that experiences must be simple, intuitive, and user-friendly. What separates them in more ways than one from their competitors and from the companies that are trying to disrupt them is the simplicity and elegance of their experience. Obviously, the technology that powers that experience is also compelling and innovative. There's no doubt about it, right? I mean, the innovation that has gone into some of the products that every one of these companies has built is unbelievable. But the magical innovation that they've all sort of leveraged to the greatest extent has been in the user experience. Now let's look at some of the companies that have not gotten it right as much. Or actually, they're not necessarily all companies. They're companies or products from some of these companies also, which is interesting. So the first one, I mean, we just spoke about Google search and how that has been extremely successful. A stark contrast to that is Google Plus. As I'm sure many of you know, Google Plus has been under development from Google for close to 10 years. They started in 2011. And if I'm not mistaken, they are currently in their fifth incarnation. They launched earlier this week as Google Current. They keep repivoting, changing their name. But at the end of the day, they have not been truly successful. What's interesting about them is that the design is fairly elegant. It's actually quite compelling. It builds on some of the success that they had with Google search. But at the end of the day, when they launched, A, they were late to market, and B, most of the capabilities that they launched with were almost identical to what was already supported by the incumbents who had already been successful. They tried to add a few new capabilities that looked great on paper, that sounded great in theory, but didn't actually resonate with their users. So they made numerous attempts. They're continuing to, as I said, they just launched Google Currents on Android recently. I think it was earlier this week. They continue to take runs at this, but they've had limited success. Not to say that they will never be successful. They've just struggled with it. And from my perspective, the fact that they have not been able to differentiate themselves is primarily around the desirability piece, in that they have not found something unique that they can add to this that would be desirable from their users' perspective. The next example is Segway. Segway launched to huge hoopla many years back, and it was expected to completely transform how we transport ourselves. But this is a great example of a company that didn't spend enough time on the feasibility component. And feasibility, not necessarily from a technology point of view, but feasibility in the context of safety and accounting for the fact that different countries had laws that put some constraints and restrictions on how motorized vehicles could be used on their streets. So as you probably know, they just decided to shut this down a few weeks back. Okay, it started with a lot of hoopla, but really never met the expectations that people had set for it. I may be dating myself a little bit by talking about RIM and BlackBerry, but as Sai said, I've been with Adobe for 15 plus years, and I worked on Maya prior to that. So you all know that I've been in the industry for a while. So I can think back and remember the days of the RIM BlackBerry, where BlackBerry was in all situations synonymous with enterprise smartphone usage. But they didn't see this groundswell around touch interfaces that Apple saw and leveraged and doubled down on, and essentially chose to disrupt them, or used to disrupt them, by not necessarily changing what the capabilities of a smartphone. The capabilities have evolved since then, but when the iPhone launched, the main difference was how the users would interact with the device, and it was all about using touch. And for whatever reason, BlackBerry, and I remember even having some conversations with them because we were partnering with them, they chose to ignore that. They thought it would not resonate with users, and the fact that they had a keypad, or a real physical keypad on their device was enough to differentiate themselves and keep them in market. And obviously the proof is in the pudding, where Apple is wildly successful, and RIM, at least the device division, is no longer in business. And the last example I'll talk about is Google Glass. Another example from Google, where we've just talked about how they've been wildly successful with search and a few other initiatives, undoubtedly, but have not had as many successes in some of the other areas. Google Glass, once again, launched with a lot of hoopla, but they were not clear about the user problem that they're going to be solving. They assumed that if they were to launch the device, if they were to have it out there, users would find meaningful uses for it. And that, while sounds good in theory, does not always play out. Right? You're more successful if you're clear, if you're laser focused on the problem, on the user problem that you want to solve, and make sure that you do a great job solving that. And then, yes, your users may surprise you and may use the same solution for other user problems. But if you don't start with a clear articulation of the user problem that you want to solve, then chances are that will not be as good as it could. And Google Glass is a great example of that. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about disruption. I've actually talked about it a little bit in the context of RIM, where Apple came and disrupted RIM for all practical purposes. I spoke about it briefly in the context of Uber and Airbnb, where I was talking about how a well-designed app is essentially basically wiping out entire industries, right? The hospitality industry and the taxi ride sharing industry are both being entirely disrupted by Uber and Airbnb. So what is disruption? At the end of the day, disruption is when something or someone external to your business comes and challenges the status quo and disrupts business as usual. What we find quite often is that businesses get caught in the process of, or they get caught up in the process of protecting their base, protecting their revenue stream, protecting their profit margins, and tend to not realize that there are external factors who are always on the lookout to disrupt them, especially if they are wildly successful. So the question that we should all be asking ourselves is, if we want to be disrupted, or if we want to be on the lookout for anyone who's trying to disrupt us, or even better, be the ones who are disrupting so that you're not being disrupted. But that requires companies, organizations, products to be willing to transform themselves when the market and the technology around them changes. And the question that I asked at the start around Flash is a great example of that. We left ourselves in a position where we were getting disrupted. And the question then is, what did we do to respond to that? But we left ourselves vulnerable to being disrupted. And I think that's something that I would, if I were to go back in time, that's something that I would like to do differently, because it was not a great place to be. Because the moment you're disrupted, you're in a defensive position, and it's incredibly hard to really come back with the feeling that you've won. Chances are you're on the defensive forever, and the company that has disrupted you, or the product that has disrupted you, ends up being more successful than you were. Okay, so we've talked about the digital transformation. We have talked about how it's important to have innovation, or think about innovation, and how innovation has worked for some and not as much for others. And we've also talked about how businesses run the risk of being disrupted and should take steps to be the ones disrupting as opposed to being disrupted. So the question to ask is, what tactics can we as product leaders use to succeed in this landscape of rapid change, where there is a clear need to drive innovation so that you are in the forefront of disruption and making sure that you're not being disrupted, right? So it's a combination of all of this. You want to be able to drive innovation. You want to be able at the forefront of disruption and not be the one being disrupted. So I have a few ideas, a few strategies and tactics that I've used as it comes down to product leadership that I thought I could share with all of you. Happy to see how it goes. Happy to hear your thoughts and comments on them. This is not one size fits all, but these are just some ideas that have worked and have resonated very well for me, and I've worked as I've evolved, during my career. First among them is the art of storytelling. In more ways than one, I strongly believe that storytelling differentiates the average product manager from the great product manager. product management and product leadership is all about leading by influence. And the ability to tell a consistent and compelling story is a huge component of that. Your ability to influence others is dramatically better if you have the ability to tell a story that is relatable, that everyone around you can relate to. Very often, I have product managers who come to me, who come to these meetings and presentations. We call them our CAs, our concept accept meetings, where they come to me with a laundry list of features. And what happens is that they don't necessarily tie it to a broader vision. They don't tie it to a broader vision of why these features really matter in the context of the broader vision. They don't spend enough time talking about what problems are we actually solving? Who are we solving them for? Why is it important to solve them? Why is it important to solve them now? What is the competitive landscape around these capabilities? What is the impact of not solving them now? And so on and so forth. So if you can frame what you're trying to do in the context of a story where you can connect all these pieces together, then your chances of success are dramatically improved. Compelling stories or good stories are simple, they are relatable, they are relevant, and they are consistent. At some level, I think product leadership is all about providing and communicating a compelling vision, and then inspiring and motivating the people around you to do whatever they can do to deliver on that vision. And I think effective storytelling is a key component of that. It's a key tool that you have in your toolbox to allow you to do that. Another key component is, as I was just talking about, a vision, and ensuring that you frame that vision very clearly in the context of where you want to go. And I refer to this as flag planting. Actually, this is something that our CEO, Shantanu Narayan, brings up all the time. And the idea here is, if you know clearly where you want to go, if you know exactly what your vision is, it's important to state that. And it's important to start by planting that flag and being clear about where you want to go. But it's not just about you being clear about where you want to go. It's about bringing the organization, your team, your stakeholders, the people you need to work with, along with you on that journey to ensure that everyone is aligned on where you want to go, where that flag is, where it is that you need to get to eventually. Once you have everyone aligned on that, you then start talking about how you get there. You then talk about how you build the road to get there. And the road that you build should not be set in stone, right? It should be one that you're creating along the way with intermediate milestones where you're listening to your customers and you're data-driven. Also, you should be looking for signals from the environment. This is where you should be looking for signals from the market around you. It could be socioeconomic signals. It could be political signals. It could be health signals. I mean, looking at what we're dealing with today. It could be all kinds of signals, but also in the context of your customers, where you're closely working with your customers to ensure that you're building a road that works for them. Once again, with the eventual goal of getting to that flag that you've planted. Now, this is not to say that that flag that is planted will not change or will not move. Sure, if need arises and you have to, shift that flag, you should be open to doing that. But for the most part, your vision that you're going after should not change, should be set fairly well, and is one that everyone is excited about, everyone wants to work towards. And then you're all working together, hand in hand, to build that road that gets you to that vision, to that flag. But how do you get everyone excited about that flag? Right? How do you get everyone excited about getting to that vision? And that's where I think there's the component of the why. And the key point I'm trying to make here is that as product leaders, I would encourage all of you to start with the why. Start with the why and talk about why the work that is being done or the work that needs to be done is important. Why is this problem important to solve? Who are we solving it for? Why is it important to solve it today and not later? And so on and so forth. Once we've gotten everyone aligned and excited about the why, then we can start talking about the what and the how. The what is what are we going to do to address the why, and the how is how are you going to do it, right? How are you building the solution that would address the why? But a lot of it starts with the why. And what I find that inspirational leaders and organizations that can bring teams with them all start with the why, because there's incredible power in the why. If as humans, most of us want to believe that the work that we're doing is towards an end, where the end is satisfied customers, where we're solving problems, where we're dramatically moving the needle in one way, shape, or form. And being clear about what that is makes it significantly easier to get everyone on the journey with you. So now that we have discussed a few strategies for effective product leadership, I thought I could spend a couple of minutes walking through a process that I think works fairly well to sort of put some of this in motion. It's a fairly simple process. It's actually quite intuitive. Once I walk you through it, you'll probably all agree that it is fairly straightforward and intuitive. It starts with empathizing and understanding your users and their needs, right? Doing the market research to really understand your users and their needs. Then it moves on to defining a point of view for how you can address your users' needs. It's more than the how, it's what you can do to address your users' needs. Next up is about ideating, where you spend time brainstorming and you think about how you can address the needs that you've identified in step one. Then you prototype. Prototypes can be in any form. It can be paper prototypes, can be prototypes online, use tools like usertesting.com, but prototypes to really represent and bring out some of these ideas and bring them to life to the extent possible. And then test them. Test them out with your users, the users that you've identified in step one. And to the extent possible, repeat these steps, especially at a minimum from step 3 to 5, and possibly even go back to step 2 if needed. But essentially, you need to iterate through this process multiple times to identify the right product for the right user to address their needs. And if you think about this maps very well to what I was saying earlier, where your step one is all about the why, where you're trying to understand who your user is, what problems are you trying to solve. The second step, definition, is about the what. What are you going to do to solve their problems? And the ideation phase is the how, in that how are you going to solve those problems? You could also say that step one is where you ensure that the work that you're doing meets the direction that you're headed in from a compelling vision point of view. So the flag that you planted should be, or the work that you do as part of the empathize phase should be aligned with that flag that you planted at the very beginning of this process. Now, as I said, you can iterate through this process multiple times where you ideate, prototype, test, and you can go round and round in that phase for a long, long time. And as I was thinking about that, I just thought of this quote that I'd seen from Reid Hoffman, who, as I'm sure all of you know, is the CEO of Netflix, where he said that um, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. Now, being embarrassed may be taking it a little too far. I probably wouldn't go that far if I were to say this. But the point that he's making is that you don't want to go too long with trying to get your product to be perfect by iterating through these three phases for way too long. And I remember running into this in my past career before Adobe, where we were working on this product that had the potential to be incredibly successful. But we were in a competitive situation. We had a fairly big, a couple of big competitors who were doing very well. And we kept finding reasons for why we were not ready to launch, right? We kept finding issues. We kept finding new features that we thought were critical. And we kept, I mean, this was scope creep at its best. We just kept adding features, capabilities, issues, and every possible reason to delay the launch of the product. The product, when it launched, ended up being too late on a couple of fronts. The industry had evolved to the extent that the users were no longer willing to pay as much as we thought we needed them to pay. Given the investment that went into it, our cost structure was such that we required them to pay that for the product to be viable. And more importantly, the capabilities had shifted from having all the capabilities in a product to being more around an ecosystem, where you have an ecosystem that sort of plugs in to that product. And we hadn't necessarily recognized that to the extent required while we were sort of iterating on this product to make it perfect. So the key message is try not to be overly obsessed about making your first version perfect. Get it out there, learn from your users, learn from your customers, and be willing and able to iterate as quickly as possible, because there's value in getting it right with your customer base along with you on the journey. So we talked a little bit about competition. And when I think about competition, I can't help think about how Amazon does things. In terms of gold standards, I would say that they have essentially defined the gold standard as it relates to how they treat their customers. But what do they do about their competitors? They're aware of their competitors. They stay aware, they know exactly what's happening with them. But their primary area of focus is around being obsessed with their customers. And I love this graphic here on the top with Usain Bolt running his final stretch of his gold medal winning run for one of the Olympics, where you can see that he's looking back to ensure that his competitors are behind him. And that's really it. I mean, he doesn't really care about how far behind. He's just making sure that they're not right next to him. And he's making sure that he's ahead of them, which is obviously good enough in the context of a sprint race. But when it comes to business, the key is that the primary objective for all of us should be to be customer obsessed. Because while the competition may be right, while the competition may know what needs to be done, at the end of the day, the people that matter are our customers. And in more ways than one, it's our customers who are right. There's another thing that I just thought I should put out there. Many of us, when we think about product development and product leadership, we spend a lot of time talking about data-driven decision making. And I love this cartoon because I think it really brings out a very, very critical point here, which is while we focus on data and instrumentation and making sure that we are measuring all the right metrics as it relates to downloads in the context of apps, or page views in the context of a website, or number of people buying our products if it is something that's more physical, or the click-through rate if it's a button. What we often lose sight of is the measurable impact or the outcome that some of those actions have. And this is more for, it's not necessarily a groundbreaking thing here, but what I wanted to do was just highlight that as all of you as product leaders, when you're trying to put your emphasis behind data-driven decision making, I would encourage all of you to really take a step back and ensure that while you're instrumenting, or while your engineers are instrumenting the product to provide data, your focus as product leaders should be on measurable impact, on how you can measure the impact that that feature or that capability or that product is having on whatever matters for the business. It could be business metrics, it could be just usage, but whatever matters, it's all about ensuring that you're aligned on the outcome and ensuring that the decisions that you're making, the data that you get and the decisions that you're making are all in service of that outcome, are driving that outcome that you're looking for. So with that, I'd just like to summarize some of the key things that I've talked about. I think I'm doing fairly well on time. Maybe I've gone a little longer. Sorry about that, Sai.
No, you're doing well.
Yeah. Okay, good. So some of the key takeaways, innovation. I mean, in this age of constant change around us, it's important for us to continue to innovate. But as we do that, be sure to strike the right balance between desirability, feasibility, and viability. You have a choice to be made. Either you're going to be disrupted or you should be the one doing the disruption. And I personally would like to be the one doing the disruption and making sure that I fend myself from others disrupting me. But that's something that I would highlight for sure. Use storytelling to get people excited about what you want them to do. As product leaders, it's important. It's an important tool you have in your toolbox, but make sure that your stories are simple, relatable, relevant, and consistent. Flag planting and then road building. I think we've talked about that. The power of why ahead of the what and the how. And lastly, it's good to be aware of your competition, but it's more important, it's better to be obsessed about your customers. With that, I'll hand it back to Sai and be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Govind. That was superb, very specific, very prescriptive steps for people to take back and apply in their context. I do see a few questions coming up. It was interesting. I came across a quote the other day. Things are never going to be as slow as they are now. And I kept wondering, what does that even mean? And it's true, because it's only going to get faster every time, right? They're never going to be slow as they are today. So the question is, how do we even keep pace with change, right? So we talk about disruption, but that also requires us to be having a pulse around us in the market, especially as leaders, right? If you're leading an organization, leading a business, leading a team, I think it's one thing to say that you have to watch out for things, but what are there any ways that you personally follow so that we keep up with the pace?
I think that's a really good question, Sai. And the need of the hour, so to speak, is to do two things in parallel, right? On the one hand, you should absolutely be exploiting your existing assets and capabilities. You should be doubling down on them and making sure that you get the best out of them. You drive the business metrics that you can with the existing assets and capabilities that you have as an organization. But on the other hand, you also have to ensure that there is enough effort going into explorations, where you are continuing to ensure that there are people within your organization who are aware of what's happening outside, who are exploring new ideas, who are exploring new trends, and seeing how you can keep up with those trends and drive successes based on that. And a good leader, or great leaders and great companies, are ambidextrous in that they can strike the right balance between both. They know how to exploit your assets and capabilities very well, and know how to invest appropriately in the explorations to drive explorations forward. And then the question is, where do you make that switch? When do you sort of find that one of these explorations has become big enough that you need to make them part of your mainstream, so to speak. And that's where you really have to strike that right balance. It's not easy, but I think that's one of the key reasons many businesses flounder, because they go all in on the exploitation, where they're just going all in on just driving their existing successes, and they are blinded to things that are happening outside.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really big mistake that many of us make, and we should absolutely not be making, where you should be sort of be ambidextrous to the extent possible. And it's easier said than done, don't get me wrong, but many of these things are easier said than done.
And
That
that's
doesn't mean that
probably
you don't do it.
where you'll be taken by surprise and then are lost about what to do with it. Of course, if you have the support and have the experience, you will react to this pretty quickly, pivot, and as you just explained, how Adobe had to do that in the context. But you're saying don't be blindsided by just explorations, but really pay attention to probably the carpet being pulled under your feet.
Exactly.
Right? Something that might happen.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, good. So in fact, you mentioned art of storytelling, and I think what I wanted to ask you, and by the way, the previous question, I kind of paraphrased what Dipankar had asked, right? And kind of generalized it so that, we could address that in a broad way. So here, before we talk about, in your point of view, what are the key skill sets or mindsets that you think are required for anybody to get into a leadership role or even maintain where you are in the leadership role, right? So, but before you answer that, I'd like to take a quick poll from the audience to see how or what do they think about it, right? So, if you can have the poll that talks about the specific skill sets that we have been hearing from many people that are required for, being a leader or moving into a leadership role, then we can comment on what you think about it. Yeah. You may not be seeing the poll right now, but quickly, as soon as the results are out, it'll show up on your screen. But please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. A large part of it, I would say, is your ability to, well, it's two things. At a minimum, it's two. I generally start by saying it's two, and I end up saying three things. But it starts by being able to see the bigger picture, right? I think as leaders, if we can see the bigger picture, that is one way to differentiate ourselves from everyone else. At the end of the day, most people are capable of, being tactical and delivering on whatever they're being asked to do. But if you can think beyond that, if you can think beyond what is now and here and think bigger picture and see how you're sort of addressing, as you brought up a few minutes back, the needs of the broader ecosystem, what's happening around you, like how do you sort of drive change within your organization based on the bigger picture? That's a big part of what I think is critical. The second is being able to work with people around you, especially as product leaders. It's important, as I said during my talk, it's really important to be able to influence the people around you, and you have to find the right tools and the right mechanisms to do that. It's not one size fits all, but it's critical to ensure that you come across as someone who can lead them, right? Who can lead them, influence them, give them the reasons to believe in you, believe in the vision, and come with you, along with you on that journey. And I think that's another critical component of being successful as leaders.
Awesome. I don't know if you're able to see that poll on the screen that came up, but were you able to see, Govind, or do you want me to read?
Yeah, you are. That. Yes, absolutely.
Looks like majority of them are saying empathy and active listening is something that's one of the most important skills to get into leadership role. Wouldn't argue with that. In fact, I personally believe all of them are very important, the ones that are listed there. But to me as well, I think, as you said, art of storytelling tops the list, right? Yeah. No doubt about that.
I really like these, actually. I mean, I'm just looking at this, right? Empathy and active listening, in my mind, is a critical component of basically coming up with that story that resonates with everyone, right?
Yes.
You have to have empathy, and you have to be able to listen to multiple perspectives to build out a story that addresses the needs of customers and your users and brings them along for the journey. So I think this is great. I'm glad.
And our audience seem to agree. So with that, I think it's a wrap. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate you taking your time and giving us these actionable insights. One request though, Govind, when you get some time in your busy schedule, people have asked a few questions on the LinkedIn thread that you're also tagged on. And if you could just take a few minutes to respond to that, I think, it's an engagement that can go on, right? And
happy to do that. Very happy to do that.
thank you so much. And over to you, Menaka. And, as a token of our appreciation, Govind, here is a digital certificate, if to say the least, right? And we certainly will try to get a blockchain one next time. But for now, I think we'll just have to accept the digital one, right? Thank you again so much.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Right.
No, thank you very much, Sai, and the entire team at IPL. I think this is a fantastic institute, and thanks once again for the opportunity. I really had a great time doing this. So thank you.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Govind. Thank you, Sai. Now, please scan this. Before we move on to the next very interesting session, please scan this QR code and send us your testimonials. And if you are a mid-career person, you would not want to miss out the opportunity to attend this mid-career transition session and know all about trends in product careers. Please see your chat window for the registration URL. This is going to be a wonderful interactive session. Please go ahead and register. Do not miss this. Now, we had a wonderful session by Govind Balakrishnan, and we are moving on to the next session by Ashutosh Banerjee. Again, please scan this QR code to climb up the leaderboard and win a one-on-one mentoring session by our esteemed speakers. And for our next session by Ashutosh, please ask all the questions in the LinkedIn URL. We cannot iterate it again. So please do this, scan this QR code and keep it ready to ask questions. You can find it on the chat window also. Now coming to the session now, we have with us Kishan Malu, Senior Product Manager, VMware. Kishan is going to be our moderator for the day. Kishan has a versatile experience of building products in various domains like cloud video delivery platform, IoT, cloud infrastructure, etc. A fresh brew of filter coffee and great product conversation is something he doesn't say no to. Kishan, we are very, very happy to have you with us. Please take over the session.
Thanks, Menaka. Thank you so much. So, very good evening, good morning, greetings to all the wonderful audiences joining us from around the world. It's definitely an exciting place to be here tonight. And 2020 is a year to be remembered. Govind just spoke about disruption, and it was really, I was thinking, if we look back at the last 5 months, I'm sure all of us are wowed. Of course, apart from being worried and anxious, we're also wowed at how everything that we have known and everything that we have made peace with have changed in the last 5 months, and how we have revisited everything, from as basic as picking up grocery to the way we work or the way businesses are run. Everything has been reimagined to fit to the present. Not surprisingly, though, career is something that all of us have been thinking about in these troubled times. And so there couldn't have been, and you know what, I wouldn't be wrong if I say that we've all been collectively kicked out of our comfort zones that we were all in. So there couldn't be a better opportunity to talk about this. And interestingly enough, when I looked at the profile of our next speaker, I couldn't help but appreciate how apt this person is to talk about careers today. Someone who has made it a habit to live out of the comfort zone and make it big. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all Mr. Ashutosh Banerjee. Ashutosh, welcome. So, just a few words about Ashutosh. And you know what? When I was reading through the when I was reading through Ashutosh's profile, what came to my mind is, he has changed cities in almost every 2 years in his career. So very, and you know what, we're now, how, that's why, how, what we are talking about comfort zone and how he has made it a habit, right? So very early in his career, he took the bold step of taking up an assignment in Bangladesh for Asian Paints, and he went on to establish the largest manufacturing facility there, a greenfield paint manufacturing facility there outside India for Asian Paints. Then he took up a responsibility in Johnson and Johnson as the region and sales head in diabetes and infection control. He then moved on to GE Healthcare in India, taking up the business head role for South Asia, and then he transitioned into becoming the chief marketing officer for one of the largest global businesses of GE Healthcare. Fast forward to now, he is presently the GM for general manager for diagnostic cardiology and cardiology solution businesses. He leads the global business team with 3 manufacturing centers and 3 engineering centers worldwide. His team designs, engineers, manufactures, sells, and provides service and marketing for a portfolio of devices that take and store electrocardiogram that help in detecting and heart diseases and saving lives. So I wouldn't take much time. Without much ado, and I was that was also an interesting correlation. The topic today is heartfelt leadership, insights from a career spanning across continents, and someone who works very close to the heart, as an echocardiogram, and somebody who wants to share his heartfelt thoughts on leadership, on having careers from across the continents. Ashu, welcome, and the ball is yours. Please, we are all anxious and we are all excited to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kishan. That was some introduction. Thanks for all those kind words. And yeah, heartfelt leadership, because I always joke that I am not really talk about matters of the heart from an emotional point of view, but I try and talk about matters of the heart from a biological point of view. So I'm thank you for inviting me, and I also thank the Institute of Product Leadership for thinking of me when they thought of a session here. So let me just share my screen and so what I want to talk about today, since I've had the unique opportunity of working across continents, I thought I'll share some of my insights from there. Let me just get the screen going. There we go. Hope everybody can see that. It's showing through clearly.
Yes.
So,
yes,
great, thank you. So the topic today is heartfelt leadership, and like Kishan mentioned, it is also because I look at a cardiology business across GE Healthcare, but it's also something that is close to my heart and close to a very big topic that I think is somehow underrated today when we talk of leadership. And I want to start with a quote from a person who is very relevant in today's day and age, given what is happening in the United States and countries around the world. So Thurgood Marshall was the first African American justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and a long time ago in the 60s, in the late 60s. This is one of the quotes that I think is still relevant and will remain relevant forever, is a bet I can take. He said that the measure of a country's greatness is its ability to retain compassion in times of crisis. Very relevant for today's day and age. And I can also say it is relevant for every organization as such, because when an organization is challenged, like every organization around the world is today, it is the organizations that really do well are the ones that retain compassion. And like I said, it is something that is usually underrated. So I want to start with this as an introduction to why I want to talk about heartfelt leadership and why I want to talk about empathy in leadership. But before that, let me give you a little bit of an insight about on me to begin with. And maybe you're thinking, why is this guy someone you should really listen to? So first of all, I'm not here to give you directions, and I'm not here to give you, formulate for success or something like that. but I want to share my experiences, and maybe there's something that resonates. And I look forward to all the questions and hearing from you as well about what you thought. So first of all, this term is what I used to call myself very early on in my career. You might ask, why Finite Indian? Because very early on in my career, because of the fact that I wanted to be one of the finite voices amongst my infinite countrymen, or so it seemed at that time, because there is always a lot of competition wherever you go. You go for an IIT entrance exam, go for an IIM entrance exam, go and take any debate, there is competition. And I wanted to be one of the finite voices that are listened to across the world. I think I'm still working towards that, but it remains a goal, and it remains an aim for me to really make my voice heard and be relevant and be counted for something amongst the infinite, I can say the global citizens around the world today. So who's this Finite Indian? I am a salesman at heart, and I would say that I have always been in commercials. I have done in sales commercial roles for most of my career. I like to say that I've sold trousers, I've sold paint, I've sold computers, hardware, software, IT solutions, sold glucometers. Now I sell medical devices. And I think everybody out here listening here is a sales or a commercial person at heart, because everybody sells something. We sell something about us. We sell something about the companies we work for, or our product that we do. I've lived in India and Bangladesh, like you heard Kishan say, for a major part of my career. And I moved to the US just in 2015, 5 years ago. As soon as I moved in here, we had to counter with snow. I saw my first snowfall in 2015 when I moved to the US. I had never seen snow before that either. And now I've had to contend with foots of snow and trying to shovel my driveway. This is my front driveway where I have to usually contend with snow accumulation. You have to clear it out in the beginning on the morning. Otherwise, you can't take your car out, can't go to work. So I've learned all of that. Very steep learning curve, I would say, as far as snow is concerned. But we also learned how to enjoy it. And that's my daughter there building some snowmen in our backyard there. So it's been a little bit of an interesting transition from India to the US. And I will talk more about that as we go forward. My career, I took up, went to Bangladesh, lived there for 5.5 years. And incidentally, that used to be my longest stay in one place ever in my life till I moved to the US. So that was a very interesting startup experience very early on in my career, shaped a lot of my thinking about my maturity. Maybe I matured there. It was very early on in my career, maybe 2 years into my career. After Asian Paints, I joined a leadership acceleration program. I would say it was a string of failures there. I learned what not to do in a large organization. Sometimes that is as important as knowing what to do in a large organization. Moved to Johnson & Johnson. That was my first company in the healthcare space. I accelerated business in tough markets. I always joke that I'm half a doctor. So I'm half an endocrinologist. I can talk about diabetes enough that, I may look knowledgeable, although I'm not very deep in this, obviously. And I understood things like difference between disinfection and sterilization, about matters of the heart, what is coronary artery disease, and so on. So always been a steep learning curve, and I've always tried to learn wherever I go. And in GE, I have finally, with the help of some mentors in the company, I've globalized myself. Some of my passions, travel is one of them, and photography goes with that pretty well. So the flowers are from my garden here. So it was very easy to take a photograph, and the pictures below are from one of my favorite cities in the world, in Budapest. 2 years ago, I decided I have to play the guitar. So I started learning it. And I can say I'm making progress. Not there yet, but still making some progress. I'm a Bengali, so I am a foodie for sure. And since I'm a foodie, I have to stay fit. So I try running. And it's difficult in Wisconsin here where I live near Chicago, because it's cold 9 months of the year. So I have to find out ways of still trying to run and trying to keep myself fit. And I try to read books quite a bit. So overall, why I'm sharing this with you is that, I have tried in my career and my life so far, it's always been, how can I find out more and learn more? And from my learnings, I'm just maybe going to start with 2 statements. The first statement is that sometimes people think that a leader has to be an all-knowing superhero. I actually don't subscribe to this statement. I don't think a leader should be an all-knowing superhero, because to me, leadership is not about knowing everything. That's what your team is for. And the team needs to help you in filling out the gaps that the leader has. The leader should not really try and solve every problem and make everything right. I also say that I'm the result of my failures. And sometimes failures are underrated in the leadership journey of people, in the career journey of people. I strongly believe that we need to have enough failures. I need to have enough failures in my life and my career. If I don't have enough failures, it means that I'm not trying different things hard enough. I'm not trying hard enough. So it is very important for me to keep a tally of my failures along with my tally of my successes. I'm not saying succeeding is not important. At the end of the day, we all want to succeed, and it's success that helps us grow. But it's failure that are good stepping stones along the way. And when failure happens, I liken it to driving a car. I say that when you drive a car, I think that you have to look forward through the windshield, but periodically check in the rear view mirror, but not stay focused on the rear view mirror. If we are focused on the rear view mirror, obviously we won't drive, right? So life, I think, is like that. To me, at least, it is like that. I cannot keep looking back and be worried about all the mistakes I made. I make mistakes, I learn from them. I try not to repeat the mistakes. And so far, I think I've been pretty okay on that. I've made tons of mistakes though. So whenever I make a mistake, I look back in the rearview mirror and I try and analyze it, and I write notes to myself. And those are the notes that I want to share with all of you today. And maybe there are something that will resonate with you, and maybe we can have a chat about that after the talk today. So that's what this talk is going to be about. I'm going to give you some anecdotes from my life, some of the key lessons I took, and some of the notes I made to myself. Let me talk about the first one. Sometimes the best opportunity lies in what seems really bad at first. So let me give you an anecdote from early on, which also Kishan talked about in the opening sentence. So one day my boss calls me to his office in Asian Paints, and he tells me, "Hey, I've got this fantastic opportunity for you." I was all ears. I was just maybe 1 year into my job there, and I was really all ears. I said, "Yeah, tell me." He said, "Well, I want to make you the head of sales, marketing, and distribution, and I want you to go and build our largest greenfield facility." I said, "Wonderful, sounds great so far." And I said, "You will be part of the 3-member team that goes there and creates this opportunity." And he said, "Okay, where am I supposed to go?" He said, "Bangladesh." The floor fell apart from me. I said, "Really? Bangladesh?" Well, nothing against the country, but obviously when you are in your 30s, you're looking to settle down, trying to find a girlfriend, trying to get married. You don't really want to go to Bangladesh because you don't know what it will be. Because we all have this image of Bangladesh, right? It's poverty and it's a lot of people, and might not be the best place to go when you're in your 30s. And I was in Bombay at that time, so I really didn't want to move from Bombay. But when I lived in Bangladesh and discovered it as a place that is also very nice and pretty, with very good people, very nice people, and the country is phenomenal. It has taught me so many things. In hindsight, though, it was one of the best decisions I made. Going to Bangladesh was hands down one of the best decisions I made early on in my career. And I'm glad I said yes to my boss. He was a good, persuasive guy also, but I'm really glad that I said yes there, because the lessons that I learned there have stayed with me throughout my career, and they've really shaped me well. They've matured me. Some of the notes I made to myself after my 5 years in Bangladesh was about raising my hand for every opportunity. Of course, as long as they're in line with my goals. If somebody gives me to play professional badminton, for example, which is not in line with my goals, I might be good at it, but I'm not in line with the goals, I'll obviously not take that. But I want to raise my hand for every opportunity. And I've tried very sincerely to do that throughout my career. Even if the opportunity doesn't look that exciting or great, or I have too many things to do, I've tried doing that forever. And it has always helped me. So that's one big note I made to myself I try to follow. Second one seems obvious, right? Relationships we build can move mountains. It's very obvious. Everybody talks about that. But putting it in practice is difficult because it means you have to invest time. The relationships I built in Bangladesh with stakeholders, with dealers, with my team members there, they have endured even today. Even today, I am in touch with some of my team members from that team I built almost 15 years ago. So that's very important because that sustains us as we move forward. We cannot do anything without people around us. Third thing, again, seems obvious. Building, retaining a good team is key to success. But isn't it difficult? It is really difficult. Building a team is one thing. Retaining them is even more difficult. And I'm very happy when I think that the people, I would say 80% of the people I hired in Asian Paints Bangladesh, they completed 10 or 15 years in the company there. And that really contributed to their company's growth in Bangladesh. And needless to say, hard work pays off. In the end, while you're doing it, it seems really, really difficult. I remember traveling for 20 days in a month at a stretch and being really tired and really, it was all hectic and frustrating and tough. But in the end, it was really good. It was a really great experience. So these are some of the notes I made from in terms of opportunity. If I move on to the next one, this title got your attention, didn't it? So this is actually a quote from somebody, again, early on in my career, that I always value and I remember. Let me tell you an anecdote as usual about this. So I used to work for Dell, and there was this leadership acceleration program that I was part of. And as part of this, I had a project in the inside sales organization of Dell. Most of you will know Dell has a phone selling model. So the inside sales was a very important part of the business there. I did a project for 3 months for the CEO of Dell India. And that CEO today is a very well-known angel investor in the South Asia region. And he's a very sharp man. So when I made my project presentation to him, he liked it. He said, yeah, this is pretty good. I didn't know anything about this. And then as usual, I asked him for feedback. I said, tell me what are things I should do differently. He told me something which almost irritated me at that time, because he told me, I need to see more passion in you. I thought to myself, I am passionate about this. That's why I have done this project and I have made this happen. And this project is actually quite successful. It brought in a lot of revenue for the business. So I asked him, what do you mean by passion? Can you please explain? Because I think I'm passionate enough about this. He thought about this, and this is what he said. He said, it is not enough just to do good work. It matters how many people talk about it and are the champion of your good work. He says, when I walk around the floor here, nobody tells me that Ashutosh's project is what is helping me drive it. I need to hear it from them. Then I'll know that your passion has infected everybody out there. It was one of the most important lessons in my life because of these notes that I made to myself. The first one is not to be shy to promote myself and my team. And I know I still hear this from a lot of people on my team and around my team who say, hey, I'm doing good work. Why should I promote it? It sounds odd. It is uncomfortable. Why should I talk about my work? So what I tell them always is be careful about how to promote yourself, but not whether you need to promote. It's not good to go and tell people, hey, I did this work. You should talk about me. Obviously, that will irritate people and put them off. But it is good to talk about, seek feedback and ask what was good in my work and how that helped the other person, and did the other person know about this work? And that is always required because people do not know. We live in large organizations. A lot of us work in large organizations. We live in large countries. We live in large societies. And we need to make sure everybody is aware of the good work being done. And when we do that, we build champions for ourselves, for the teams. We can also promote people within the team, and then people can get some limelight. So this is, again, important, difficult to do. And it's cultural barrier comes in. I hear this more from Asian countries versus Western countries, but it's something that I definitely try and follow every time. Moving on to the third thing, the core of the topic today, and why I thought of this, it's about empathy in leadership. And I mentioned that sometimes I feel this is an underrated trait that is not really talked about quite a bit. So let's talk about a few situations here. I'm sure you've heard some of these statements in organizations, or maybe I have been guilty of saying this in the past. So I've heard senior leadership doesn't want to understand our problem, so we don't get any help. I was guilty of saying that as well. I remember one meeting. I was this young 30-year-old, late 30s guy, and the senior VP of my division had come down, and my CEO was sitting there. This was in Bangladesh. And he was telling me, he was giving me a hard time about my request. And I said, well, if you really want to help me, then you would have said yes to this already. And my CEO asked me to leave the room. I realize now why that was wrong. It was because I hadn't put myself in the shoes of my senior leader. When I hear things like that, I always, remind myself and I remind my team members, have you walked a mile in the shoes of the person you're trying to talk sense into or get help from? And why that is important, and what do I mean by walking in somebody else's shoes? As a leader of my team, I need to know what my team members are doing and what drives them and what challenges they are facing. I need to know that. I need to understand that. I need to see it from their point of view. As a team member, if I need to get help from other team members, I need to know what their goals are, what drives them, what are their KPIs, and how can I help in their KPIs. For me to get senior leaders support, I need to understand what are their boss telling them and what is their stated objective. How is this aligned to that? Can I help align it for them? Can I help present it in a way that will help them in their goals? This again is something that is I have to constantly remind myself and not fall back into the other trap of saying, hey, you don't understand, I don't get help from you. As a leader, I have to spend time to really learn what my team members do. I have to shadow them, sit with them, see what they work, how they work, get to know them, sometimes beyond the work, and find out what drives them, what motivates them. Sometimes when a team member is not available, there must be something going on in their life which is making them spend time away from work. So I have to understand them and walk in their shoes. As a team member, when I ask somebody else who doesn't work in the same team or in the same team also, I have to understand what moves them, what their goals and objectives are, and how what I am asking them will help their goals. It is important for me to think about it like that. It is difficult. I find it difficult as well. But once we do it enough number of times, it becomes a habit. So that's what is a note for myself, to make sure I keep on reminding myself to do this so that it becomes a habit. The next thing I'll talk about is surrounding myself with team members who complement and not really compliment you all the time, right? And I think this distinction is really important. Sometimes we see people surrounding themselves with what is called yes men, right? That really doesn't help. Here is an example why. This is a character profile of me. I'm sure most of you have done some kind of this study, right? There are various versions of this. There's a Mensa and so on. If you see what I am introverted, I'm intuitive, I'm assertive. Bad combination, right? My wife, when my wife saw this page, she said, yeah, finally you agree and you finally accept what you are. So what I'm not detail oriented. I am usually quick to conclude and very poor listening skills. So that's a very bad combination, I think. And what that means though, is that if I'm aware of this, and if I surround myself with people who are very detail oriented, extroverted, and they are not that assertive, but who listen, who take the time to understand and form an opinion, then we are good as a team, right? So here are the notes to myself. As a leader, I'm never better than my team. And again, I think it is sort of intuitive. There's no rocket science here, but I find so many people not thinking about it and not thinking about their team and not thinking about the fact that you have to surround yourself with people better than you to make sure that as a leader, you can get great results. And that only happens when I know my shortcomings and I bring people into the team who are better at my shortcomings. I focus on people who are detail oriented. I try to find people who are detail oriented because I know I'm not. And although I've become better at it than before, but I'll never be as detail oriented as I want to be because it's my nature. I hurry. So I bring people who are detail oriented. And if I didn't know that, and if I didn't acknowledge it, then I would never do that. And the third thing I've realized, maybe to very late in my career, I wish I knew this earlier on, bring my team members into the limelight. Give them the stage and take a backseat. I've always seen the reflected light falls on me. And people know that this leader is the one who brought the team member. But sometimes that doesn't happen normally because maybe I'm insecure or somebody else is insecure. And they feel that if you highlight somebody else, the focus will go away from you. But these are my notes. If I bring my team members into the limelight, it always reflection shines on me and it helps me. So build a better team then build a team with people better than yourself and give them the stage. That was what I noted for myself. Let me talk about procrastination. So when I say this, I'm sure a lot of people think that it is bad, right? Putting things off for tomorrow, not giving an answer right away, delaying, and not really be decisive, bad, right? But let me talk about a couple of examples where it actually might be good and might be beneficial. So let me give you two scenarios. A team member comes to you for a solution for a problem. What do? Give a solution right away, jump into it and say, hey, here's what we should do. Or there is a fire, a problem, a catastrophe, escalation somewhere. What do? Jump in and give an answer? Well, I'm going to submit to you that actually in these cases, if we procrastinate a little bit, and on the notes to myself, I'll talk about how I handle it, and maybe there is something I could get some questions from, hopefully. But this might be helpful because then it helps create and cultivate your team and develop them. Possibly still not okay to procrastinate for a lot of things, like maybe in opportunity. If somebody gives an opportunity and I say, hey, I'll decide next year, maybe not good. But I think these situations are what come to mind when it is okay maybe to procrastinate. And why? I think first lesson I learned is if I stop the urge for myself to give a solution to a problem, and I ask the team member to give me options with pros and cons, it helps grow my team member. And sometimes, and actually every time, the answers that come back are better than my initial solution. That has happened without fail every time. And now I'm more comfortable doing this than I was before. But this is a great way of developing the team members around you, developing people around you. Obviously, I can't say this when my boss asks me the question because I have to give an answer to my boss, right? It is the same as I'm asking my team member and asking him to or her to come up with options. But if I do that with my team members, it's always very helpful. So procrastinate and resist the urge to give a solution right away. Sometimes it is also okay to use judgment to decide on the fine line when it is okay not to act in an urgent escalation. There have been cases where initially it was serendipity. I was not looking at my email. I was on holiday maybe, and there was some situation that required some help and escalation. People had written to me. They tried to reach me. They couldn't. Maybe I was on a plane or something. But when I landed, I figured out that somebody in the team rose to the challenge and solved the problem. They brought together a team and they solved the problem themselves. So the note to myself was, sometimes it is okay not to act urgently in an urgent escalation because that gives the team a chance to resolve the issue themselves. It again helps to grow the team. So there is a common theme here. The theme is that if I let the team rise up to the occasion, we will find people who are the next leaders in the team. And as a leader, we owe it to our teams to give them that opportunity. And it is okay not to come across as knowing the solution to every problem. Although sometimes your team members may push it. And initially I used to think, hey, if I don't give a solution, maybe the team member will think that I don't know and I'm just shirking responsibility. But that doesn't happen. And usually team members rise to the occasion and really shine. So that's something that worked for me. Maybe it does for you. Let me talk about something that is always talked about. I call it that culture thing. Culture is, again, I would say, sometimes underrated. It is underrated because a culture, if we don't understand culture and if we don't understand the way people work and the way people behave, we may not be able to catch on to the right way of working with them. Let me give you an example as an anecdote. So, all of you would be familiar with this picture, I'm sure. In India, this is the common way of work, right? So you have tea, you get on a call or meet people. If it's late in the evening, you may not just have tea, you may have something different in that you may have a glass instead of that cooler in front of you. But that is what I call tea diplomacy in India. You resolve issues by taking somebody out to tea or taking somebody out to lunch or giving the person a call. That's what I was used to because I've spent most of my career in the Indian subcontinent. Imagine my surprise when I moved to the US and I found this. So cubicles with tall tall walls. And this is in GE Healthcare, so it might not be representative of every industry because, for example, the Bay Area is the standard open office kind of thing. But GE Healthcare is still a little bit of this kind of a cubicle kind of an approach. And I realized that if I wanted to get in touch with anybody, I would give them a call like I used to do in India. And they would never take my call. They would never take my call. They wouldn't return my text messages. Partly because maybe they didn't know me and I didn't know enough people in the US when I moved in there. But later on, I realized that if I send people a calendar invite on Outlook, they would accept that invite, they would get on a call, and we would come to a good solution. But it took me a good 3 months to realize that. And I really wish in hindsight I had known about this before and somebody may have told me that, hey, don't call them, just set up a calendar meeting. But that's a small example. You would think, hey, this is too small to really talk about. But did you know that the fact when I realized that I could get calendar invites going, my productivity really zoomed and I could get stuff done, which in the past I would never be able to do because I wouldn't be able to reach people. This is a cultural difference in the way people in India work and people in the West work, in US especially, and especially in Wisconsin part of it. There are also sub differences within the US as are in every country. But this really is a stark example. There are several more. There is the Asian versus the Western countries difference, where if you want to build something or do something in the Middle East, you have to build a relationship, go out for a meal, spend time, have a drink, depending on the country you are in the Middle East, and build that relationship, right? Sometimes food works, sometimes drink works, sometimes just sitting and across the table works. In Japan, they will take a lot of time to have trust in you. You have to build trust with the Japanese. It takes a while, and you have to show it with consistent follow-throughs that you do with them. In China, it is hierarchical. If you don't please the boss, then nobody in the team will really work with you. Europe is again different between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Why this is important? It is important because in a global role like me, I have to work with people from all walks of life. I have 3 engineering sites, one in Bangalore, one in China, one in the US. And we all have to adjust to the ways the 3 places work and how hierarchical or lack of hierarchy there is in those countries. There are also language differences. I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote which will show that. All of you have used the word scheme in India, right? So there is this Pradhan Mantri scheme, and there is the sales scheme, and there is this gold coin scheme and whatnot. We have used scheme like that forever without any negative connotation. There was this meeting which I did very, very soon after taking over in my current role. And we had a meeting with all the sales team members. And I was talking to my India head for my business. And I was saying, hey, why don't you run a sales scheme? And we were talking animatedly about running the scheme here and doing it well and making the scheme very big and so on. And I noticed that around the room, all my US and European colleagues were really staring at me open-eyed, and they were saying they were shocked. Later on, somebody told me, hey, scheme really means something illegal in the US, okay? So don't use the word scheme. You may want to use campaign or something else like that. So that was a very interesting way of finding out that there are words which you don't use in the US, right? Otherwise, people won't either follow or the meaning will be different. So when I moved from an India-based role to a US and a global role, that was thrown into the limelight much, much more than in India. Even in India, I know all of you, I'm sure you would agree when I say, if you talk to a person from the west of India in Bombay versus talking to somebody from Kolkata, there is a difference in the way people behave and the way you have to talk to them. I always would joke with my people that the North India sales head, whatever number he would give me, I would deduct $1 million from that at the end of the quarter. And my Western Indian person, I would add $500,000 to that because I know the way they behave. So these differences are important. Culture is really important. And the notes I have always kept to myself is the culture of the place where my team member comes from or hails from usually defines behavior. Even if the person is working here in the US, but the person is originally from the Middle East or from India like me or from China, it defines behavior, right? Unless they have been in the US for a long, long time and then it changes a bit. But I have to take time to find that out and understand what motivates the team member and what is the cultural element behind it. And I have to adjust and fine tune my behavior depending on which part of the world I'm working with. Words and body language matter quite a bit. And that comes to a great deal in play when I go to Japan, I go to China, and I go to the Middle East. You have to really, really modulate the words and body language and understand the culture of the place and, really tune myself to it. Another anecdote I always remember is after almost 2 years of working with the same team in Japan, I got my first gift from the Japanese team. One of them gifted me a bottle of sake. So I said, okay, and now I have the trust of the team here. So it was not the sake, but the act of giving a gift to me, which said that after 2 years, I finally got trust. Winning the trust is difficult, keeping it is even more difficult. So that depends, and that only comes when I really fine-tune myself to the culture of the place. The last thing I'll talk about is we are humans after all, right? So some behaviors are the same. And when I moved to my global role, this was really brought into me, and I really realized the true extent of this, because being humans, we behave similarly, whether we are in India, whether we are in Europe, whether we are in the US. Let me illustrate this by 2 charts. You would think, how can I talk of human beings and show charts? Let me share and let me illustrate. So these 2 charts look the same, right? And I wish we were in person here, because I would have got some show of hands or something here. But these 2 charts look the same, don't they? But these 2 charts come from a very different place. Especially if you look at this green line, hockey stick kind of behavior. The left-hand chart is actually an engineering chart. It's if you are familiar with Agile and the way of creating products there, it's about feature point delivery. And the right-hand chart is a sales chart. It's a revenue delivery. It's the same. Whether you are in engineering or whether you're in sales, the behavior is the same. Towards the end of the quarter or the PI, program increment, you actually deliver most of the stuff. What does it tell you about the people behind it? They are all run by human beings. So that was one of my very early sort of profound aha moments where I said, well, there are human beings everywhere. And even though they come from different places, and living in India all my life, maybe I was somewhat in awe of people in the Western countries, but I realized they are people like you and me. They have the same home life jokes, the same jokes about the wife being the head of the business here at home, the home ministry, and taking permission from the wife before doing anything. Same mother-in-law jokes, with due respect, due regards to everybody on the call. But some of the things remain the same for everybody. The same things move us. The same emotions about our family move us. The same emotions about getting ahead in life and at work move us. And relationships move us. So the note to myself is I have to spend quality time in building relationships and networks. And it is not just enough to spend time in building those relationships and networks. I have to really spend time to keep my network active. Keeping my network active is even more difficult than just building them. It is not enough to have thousands of contacts on LinkedIn. It is very much important to work the contacts and make sure that that you are active with them, that you are talking to them. It's very important to call up old friends and say, hey, how is it going? And not just call them when we need something from them. So it's really important to spend time in building relationships within our current work life, in our past work life, in our home network, in families. And I think all of you would agree that the COVID pandemic really brought this to life. And from working from home, I have found myself spending more time on video calls like this, where sometimes we just spend time and have a drink virtually. I have my drink here and somebody else has a drink on the other side of the camera. And even that builds a relationship. Even that keeps us all together. But that's so important because we are all human beings at the end of the day. And this may sound a little bit preachy, but honestly, the world, behaves, is more similar than different than what we think. Especially, it's my note to myself when running a global business here. It is also important as a leader to have a clear, consistent, and a grand vision, but it needs to be backed up by concrete and consistent actions. If we don't have concrete and consistent actions, grand vision amounts to nothing. The word consistent is important though, because sometimes we have a vision and we change it every 2 years. I tell people that that is not really a vision, because if a vision changes every 2 years, it is not bold enough or it's not grand enough. So I always try to make sure one of the criteria I put in is that if this vision will motivate my team or the people I work with, and is it grand enough? Can I keep it for the next 10 years? And will it still remain consistent and relevant? So relationships matter. The big vision to motivate people, rally them behind us matters. And that's the, at the end of the day, the summary I've made to myself. So in conclusion, I will talk about a quote from a person who was a master at the grand vision and rallied hundreds of people, millions of people behind him in India. That was Mahatma Gandhi. And this is one of my favorite quotes. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. And I say this you is me. I have to be the change I wish to see in the world. I can replace world by the organization as well. And again, think of it. It is easy to say, very difficult to execute on. It is easy for us to say, hey, this company, doesn't invest or doesn't pay attention to this. But I always try and ask myself the question, what am I doing to change that? And it is difficult. Let me tell you that I bitch about my company all the time. And I'm sure it is familiar to everybody. But I always try and rally myself around, go to sleep, wake up the next day and say, okay, what am I doing differently? Can I do something different to manage? Can I do something different to highlight what I want to see change in this company? Because when I was young in my career, I used to say senior leadership. Actually, I am that now, so I cannot really say senior leadership anymore. So if we have to bring change in the world, it is about heartfelt differences. It is about my behavior. It is about understanding people we work with. And it also applies to family members around us. So at the end of the day, it's all empathy. It's about understanding what we want to do, understanding people around us, understanding senior leaders, and making that effort to make change happen. So what I want to leave you with is this quote, and to say that let's bring the heart back into our leadership. Let's bring empathy back into our leadership. Let's make it heartfelt. So Kishan, that's what I had. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Ashutosh. I was really amazed. In fact, I was almost drowned in this. And in fact, I'm sure all of us would agree that it was empathy demonstrated. Even when I was looking at this, even the way in which it was presented, you always said it is notes to myself. It was not prescriptive, but it was totally a flipped version of prescription, which is what I believe, and I think that really connected, and it was truly heartfelt. We have a couple of questions, Ashu, and if it's okay, I'll try and see how I can group them and probably present it. Okay, so
Sure.
couple of things. I'm just trying to see what are the patterns and probably ask around that. Okay, first is work from home is a solution waiting for a problem, apparently, right? I mean, work from home that we are seeing now is a solution that was actually waiting for a problem to kind of present itself. So there were questions on the culture in different region and continents and how we cope up with that. And also it's even more pertinent today in how it is, we are working in this virtual setup. And you spoke about empathy in the virtual world, right? Empathy, and how does this present itself, right? For example, how can we cope up with you spoke about change of culture in different regions and continents. Now with this whole virtual setup being there, how do we cope up with this in a virtual world? How do you see, what is your thoughts on the virtual world?
Yeah, no, it's actually a very good question, Kishan. Thanks for asking that. I would say that in the virtual world, it is even more important we pay attention to empathy, and we think about how we are conducting ourselves and staying in touch. So a few things that we did, for example, we increased the number of touch points for our people, right? So again, if you look at the basic principles, I want to make sure I stay in touch with my team, understand them, still build the relationship and work on them, right? The good news was that I have met all the people on my team. But the bad news is there are still some new people who I have not met. So we increase the frequency with which we do video connects with people. Even I think with our families, I think most of us will agree, we do more video calls these days than we used to in the past before the pandemic, right? Because I think we sort of, it is brought into us to say that, hey, let's just try and stay connected more often. So I think it is even more important to be aware that we have to make an even more effort to stay connected. I think that awareness is the first step. And then over communication and being in touch with people and bringing more touch points with your teams and your people is important. When we do that, then, and when we truly listen, then we can bring in that empathy, and then we can stay connected and bring that understanding. That's, I think, what is working. It is easy to say, by the way, but it is difficult to do it. It is a lot of time spent on it, but we have to invest that.
Absolutely. I think trying and connecting to another person over a video call and practicing empathy virtually is something that's really something that we all have to practice. The second set of questions, right, I think is on growth. Um, mm, Very good. Very people are very impressed. The questions are on, yes, comfort, changing out of getting kicked out of comfort zone is great. uh, Making changes to ourselves is great, but how do we grow in the face of change, in the face of relearning? There are times when you have to kind of restart everything and learn totally new thing. You spoke about culture, you spoke about your experiences, you spoke about your Milwaukee experience, where it can be as simple as that. But when we look at it from a professional point of view, there are certain times when it's not always Tom Peters, as Tom Peters says, right? It's not just a hierarchical ladder. Sometimes you have to move across, sometimes you have to move sideways, and sometimes even back. So it's almost like coming back and then going. So how do you grow in the face of change is another pattern of questions that have come up.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wonder about that every day. What has worked for me? I'll tell you what has worked for me, and maybe that will be something that people can take. What has worked for me is the ability to raise my hand for every opportunity. I'll give you a very recent example. So my title says Diagnostic Cardiology and Cardiology Solutions. So, when this pandemic hit, I actually one day decided I'll send an email to my boss and say, hey, I have some bandwidth and I can make bandwidth. If you have something I can help you with, I will be very happy to do that. And I was surprised to see an immediate email back to me saying, well, I'll take you up on that. And then this cardiology solutions things landed in my lap. I was not the first choice, but I happened to raise my hand at the right time, right? So I would say my career, for example, if I look back, is strewn with such examples where I raised my hand and said, I will do something out of my comfort zone. And it has been difficult when I took this new additional responsibility. In the initial days, it was very difficult for me to find out what I'm supposed to do. But when we do that, we see opportunities and we see more and more people looking at you, and then we can go forward and do more and really grow. So when I look back, I see myself jumping at opportunities all the time, and relationships I built have helped, because then I have had some champions with me who have seen me in the past. So those two things have really helped me. Raise your hand and make sure you work your relationships.
Awesome. uh, I think that is one area probably we all have to kind of relook at how do we leverage relationships to actually there were questions around that one as well. How to build trust, build create trust and build teams around that, and how do we motivate people around that. So definitely we'll take your word on that. Next aspect is about, you said, and glad that you kind of brought it up again, which was, and something that I noted down is also, sometimes you have to raise your hands, and sometimes the best opportunity lies in what seems bad at first. So how do you weigh risks in lieu of opportunities? So are there times when we say no to something, or what is that balance that you look at? How do you weigh risks in the balance of an opportunity?
Yeah, so it's a very good question again. So the way I look at it is I look at my goal. So one thing I did, which I think in hindsight was one of the better things I did in my life, is I wrote down my goal when I was in my 30s. one day I actually took down a piece of paper and I said, what do I want to be? So I said, I want to be a CEO when I'm at age 40. Just random, 10 years, who knows whether I'll be or not, I'll be there. But whenever an opportunity comes up, I always weigh that in light of my goal. Is it going to take me near that goal, or is it going to take me away from that goal, right? And there are always, when you have that opportunity in front of you, we never have all the information to make the right choice. So the only way I can decide whether I want to take this up or not is whether it'll keep me closer to my goal or not. Sometimes, you say no as well to an opportunity. I've done that. For example, in J&J, they were giving me something which I didn't like. So I actually moved away from it. But I also realized that there are only so many times that we can run away from opportunities. I can't keep on changing my company every time a new opportunity comes up. Because if you say no too many times in a company, you won't get the next opportunity, right? So the criteria I always use is this going to take me nearer to my goal than where I am today? And sometimes the risks are there, but I take it because I think eventually it'll work out well. And I think it has always worked out for the better. It has been difficult. If I take an opportunity with more risks, it has been difficult, but it has always in the end worked out well. So that's what I would say, Kishan.
Great. So, Menaka, I think we have time, but if we can have some more question, do we have? It's about. I think we have a few more minutes to go. Is that okay?
Take one more question, sure.
Okay, superb. So, Ashu, you touched upon one very important point, and culturally something very, very important for where we come from. So that is from India standpoint, which is not to be shy, not be shy to promote. I think that is very important, and a lot of interactions in our daily life, and we see a lot of young professionals and a lot of us actually, right? That is the hesitation point. What are your practical advices? And that's something that the audience that are here right now can take back and say, because you also touched upon one point, either overdo it or not knowing. You mentioned knowing how to promote rather than whether to promote. That was a brilliant statement. So why don't you touch upon that and maybe give us some tidbits on what are your practical advice for that? It's very contextual in this case.
Yeah, Kishan, thanks for asking that question. It's actually, I still grapple with people asking me that question every day, even today, right? So I've thought about this long and hard, and I think there are maybe 2 or 3 tips that really work for everybody. So first of all, I think if we can draw out our stakeholder map, people who are important for us to grow. For example, my stakeholder map is the CEO of my division, the CEO of GE Healthcare, and some of the other CEOs of the other larger businesses within GE Healthcare, and some of my peers in my boss's staff, right? So I have drawn that map out and said, these are the people who are important for me to make sure they are aligned with me and they know what I'm doing. Why that is important is that then the next step is easy. Then what you should do, what really works, is instead of saying, hey, I want to go and talk to you and tell you all the good things I've done, you say, can I set up time with you and ask you for some feedback? So that always works, because if somebody comes to me and say, hey, I want some feedback from you, I'm not going to say no to that person. So in the same way, when I go and say, okay, please give me some feedback. And, I was thinking about this. I did this work. I took on cardiology solutions, for example, and I think this is good, but this is bad. What do you think of it? So it does 2 things. It actually tells the person I'm talking to what I'm doing. And it also gets me feedback from that person, and it builds engagement. It builds that relationship. So next time I want a favor, I can always call him up and say, hey, I told you about some things I'm doing. Can you help me out here? Again, it's a help me out versus I'm doing this great thing. Why don't you promote me? So these 2 tips always work. If you have your stakeholders aligned, and if you go to them and ask for feedback and talk about the stuff you're doing and ask for feedback, that always works. And you will always get time with senior leaders, and you'll always get them to talk about you, because they will know, they'll find out what you're doing. So those are the 2 things I always tell people, and they, I think, are relatively easy to follow, because if you go ask for a session for a feedback, in my experience, nobody has declined that. They may ask you to come back later, but nobody usually declines a feedback seeking session.
Wonderful. Wonderful, really heartfelt. And thank you so much for taking time to answer all our questions, Ashu. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was great being here.
Absolutely.
Thank
Folks,
you, Ashutosh. That was wonderful and very, very motivating. I can see the wonderful comments that are coming up here. And thank you so much for your time and the session. And thank you, Kishan, for being with us and doing this great hosting today. And so I think we have one more thing to do, Kishan.
absolutely. So, Ashu, uh, please accept a token of thanks, a sincere thanks to you. It's a digital format right now, so this is the best thing that we can at this point of time. As we said, reimagining the way things work, right? So, a small token of our sincere appreciation of spending your time here, spending your time with us on behalf of all of us who are present and listening throughout worldwide. So, thank you very much, Ashu, once again for this excellent session.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. So before we wind up, we have a wonderful announcement, an exciting announcement. Ajit Babu is the winner for the session that happened right now. Ajit Babu asked the best question. Ajit, congratulations, and we will reach out to you with your gift. And please scan this QR code on your screen and send us your testimonials. And before we wind up, tomorrow we have two wonderful sessions. So we have Phil Libin, co-founder and CEO of All Turtles, and Shantan Subramanian, Senior Vice President of MasterCard. So join us tomorrow at 8 p.m. And these are also great leadership sessions that we have lined up for you. Don't miss this. 8 p.m. We will see you tomorrow. And before we wind up, please see your chat window for the URL to register for this event. So if you are a mid-career professional, trust me, you wouldn't want to miss this. This would give you, this is an opportunity for you to check out all your questions and ask your questions to all these experts and understand trends in product careers right now. So please go and register right away. And so tomorrow, don't forget Phil Libin and Shantan Subramanian. We will see you tomorrow. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.